Thought I was the one who never got fooled. That's the part that still sits with me. Not the anger, not the embarrassment. The fact that I had spent 67 years being careful. Careful with my money. Careful with my words. Careful with the people I let close. And it still happened right under my own roof. My daughter's name is Willa. She's 34. When she was 7 years old, she used to climb up on the kitchen counter to pour my coffee because she was too short to reach the mugs on the shelf. I kept those mugs too low on purpose after a while, just so she'd keep doing it. That's who I thought she still was. Her husband's name is Patrick. They've been married 6 years. I won't say I never had a feeling about Patrick because that wouldn't be honest. There was always something about the way he listened. Not to what you were saying, but to the part underneath it. Like he was taking inventory. I told myself I was just being a protective father. Old habit. Hard to quit. I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina 3 years ago after my wife, June, passed. We'd lived in Columbus, Ohio for 31 years, but after she was gone, the house felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every corner had something in it that used to belong to her. Her reading glasses on the end table. Her handwriting on the grocery list still stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet we'd bought in Gatlinburg on our anniversary trip in 2019. I couldn't throw any of it away, and I couldn't live in it. So I left. Willa and Patrick had bought a house in Raleigh 2 years before that. When I told her I was thinking about relocating, she found me a townhouse 12 minutes from their place. She cried on the phone when I said yes. I thought that meant something. My birthday is in March. Last year, Willa and Patrick came over for dinner. I made pot roast, which June used to make, and I don't think I got the seasoning right, but nobody said anything. And after the dishes were cleared, Patrick slid a box across the table. "We've been worried about you being here alone," Willa said, "especially at night." It was a home security system. One of those smart setups, a hub, 2 indoor cameras, a video doorbell, sensors on the windows and back door. The brand was one I recognized. Patrick said he'd already done the research, that it had the best ratings, that his brother had installed the same one. He offered to set it up himself that weekend. I said thank you, I meant it. Patrick spent about 3 hours on a Saturday getting everything running. He explained the app on my phone, showed me how to see the camera feeds, how to check the motion alerts. He was patient about it, walked me through it twice. I remember thinking that maybe I'd been too hard on him in my head. Maybe this was just a man trying to take care of his father-in-law. I used the system exactly the way he showed me, checked the doorbell feed when a package arrived, glanced at the alerts in the morning. It made me feel less like I was rattling around alone in a 2-bedroom townhouse, and more like someone was watching out for me. It took me 3 weeks to find out that was exactly the problem. His name is Lonnie. We served together. Army, 1980 to 1983. Fort Bragg, which is just over an hour from Raleigh. Lonnie lives in Ghana now, retired from 30 years doing IT infrastructure work for the state government. He's the kind of man who notices things. Always was. In the service, they put him on surveillance analysis because he could look at a satellite image and tell you something was wrong before he could explain how he knew. That instinct never left him. Lonnie came over in April to help me deal with a laptop that kept freezing. He's helped me with computer things before, and he doesn't make me feel stupid about it, which matters more than people realize when you're in your 60s, and the world has moved on to things you never trained for. He was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, and I was refilling our coffee when I heard him get quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet where someone's concentrating. A different kind. The kind where a person has noticed something and they're deciding how to handle it. "Hey," he said, "come here a second." I came over and he turned the laptop toward me. He'd gone to the security system's web interface instead of the app. I didn't even know there was a web interface, and he was on a settings page I'd never seen. "You ever been in the administration panel?" he asked. I told him no. I told him I just used the app on my phone the way Patrick showed me. Lonnie looked at the screen for another moment. Then he said, "Don't touch anything on the system. Not today, not until we figure this out." He said it the way a man says something when he's trying not to alarm you, which is how I knew I should be alarmed. What Lonnie had found was this. There were two administrator accounts on my security system. One was mine, the account Patrick had set up in my name with my email address. The other was Patrick's. His account had been created the same day he installed the system. His account had the same level of access as mine. More actually, because he had notifications turned on that I didn't even know existed. Alerts anytime motion was detected in the main living area. Anytime the front door opened, a daily summary of activity sent to an email address I didn't recognize. Lonnie pulled up the camera history. Patrick hadn't just set up the cameras in the front room and by the door, the way I thought. The indoor camera he'd placed in the hallway was angled to cover the desk area where I kept my files. The tax documents, the social security paperwork, the folder with June's life insurance information, the brokerage statements. I hadn't thought about that angle when he positioned it. I'd been thinking about whether someone could come through the back door, not about what someone standing in the living room could read from across the room with a camera set to high definition. I sat down. Not dramatically. I just needed to sit down. Plonny let me be quiet for a minute. He's good at that. He poured himself the rest of his coffee and stood by the window and didn't say anything because he knew I needed to get from one side of this to the other without someone rushing me. How long has this been running? I finally asked. Since the day he set it up, Lonnie said. Far as I can tell. 3 months. The system had been sending Patrick daily activity summaries for 3 months. He knew when I woke up. He knew when I left the house. He knew when I had visitors. And depending on how closely he'd watched the camera footage, he had a very clear view of the financial documents I kept on my desk. The first thing I wanted to do was call Willa. That was the hardest instinct to fight. Because part of me, the part that still remembered her pouring my coffee at 7 years old, wanted to believe she didn't know. That this was Patrick alone. That if I called her right now, she would be horrified, and she would come over, and that would be the end of it. But Lonnie was the one who said quietly, still standing by the window, "You need to know what you're walking into before you say anything to anyone." He was right. I knew he was right. And knowing he was right felt like swallowing something that didn't want to go down. I told him to leave everything exactly as it was. I had a neighbor, a woman named Roberta, who'd worked for a family law attorney's office for over 20 years before she retired. She lived 3 doors down, and we'd become friendly over the 18 months I'd been in the townhouse. She left tomatoes from her garden on my doorstep sometimes, and I shoveled her walk in winter. I called her that evening and said I needed advice, and to her credit, she didn't ask me to explain myself on the phone. She just said to come over. Roberta listened to the whole thing. Then she gave me the name of an attorney, a man who handled elder law and estate planning. She told me that before I confronted anyone or changed anything on the security system, I needed to know where I stood with my assets, my accounts, and my legal documents. I called the attorney the next morning. His name was Mr. Holt, and he'd been practicing in Raleigh for 27 years. I went in that Thursday. I brought the brokerage statements, the deed to the townhouse, June's life insurance documents, and my existing will, which I hadn't updated since we'd moved from Columbus. Mr. Holt spent 2 hours with me. He didn't rush. When I was done explaining the situation, he said something I've turned over in my mind many times since. The question isn't just what's been seen. The question is what they were planning to do with it. He was right, because that was the part I didn't have an answer to yet. I went home and I kept living my life. That was the strange part, the part nobody tells you about. You don't get to fall apart. You still have to go to the grocery store. You still have to take out the trash on Tuesday. You still have to sit across from your daughter at Sunday dinner and not let your face tell the truth before your mind is ready. Willa called twice that week. Normal calls. How are you eating? Do you need anything? Patrick says hi. I said I was fine. I asked about their dog. I asked whether the hydrangeas she'd planted in front of the house had come in. I watched my own voice do that, and I didn't know whether to be proud of myself or sad. Plonny came back the following Saturday. He'd done some more research in the meantime. Not illegal, nothing like that. Just the kind of digging a man does when he's spent 30 years in IT and he wants to understand a system fully. He told me the email address receiving the daily summaries had been created 4 months ago, about a month before my birthday. Not Patrick's regular email. A separate account, new, used only for this. That told its own story. Lonnie also told me something I hadn't known about the system. There was a feature, not one the average user sets up, where the cloud recordings could be accessed from a remote location and downloaded. Patrick had enabled this feature. He had been able to watch the camera footage from anywhere, in real time or after the fact at any time for 3 months. I thought about all the times I'd sat at my desk over those 3 months, reviewing my statements, calling my financial advisor, a woman I'd worked with for 12 years, whose name and firm would have been audible in a room with a live microphone, going over the documents Mr. Duckroon Holt had helped me understand, working through June's final paperwork, which I'd been putting off because it was hard, which meant I was emotional while doing it, which meant I wasn't thinking about a camera angled at my desk from the hallway. Lonnie didn't say I told you so. He didn't say anything. He just sat across from me at my kitchen table, and I could see that he was angry in that quiet way. That good men get angry, not for themselves, but on behalf of someone they care about. I asked him what he thought they were after. He was honest with me. He said he didn't know for certain, but he said the combination of financial document access, knowing my routine, and the timing 1 month before my birthday, which is when I traditionally review and rebalance my portfolio with my financial advisor, suggested this wasn't casual nosiness. Someone had put thought into this. I updated my will that week. I moved the originals of all the important documents to a safe deposit box at my bank. I changed the contact information on my financial accounts and added a verbal verification requirement with my advisor so that no change could be made without her speaking to me directly by phone. I didn't close the security system account. I didn't remove the cameras. I let everything keep running exactly as it had been. And then I waited. The third Sunday dinner after I'd found out, Willa and Patrick came over. I made chicken, which came out well. Patrick helped himself 2 seconds and asked about my golf game. Willa talked about a trip they were thinking about taking to Charleston. It was, by all appearances, a pleasant evening. After dinner, while Willa was in the kitchen and Patrick and I were in the living room with our coffee, he said, casually, the way a man says something he's been building up to for 20 minutes while pretending he hasn't. You know, Willa and I have been thinking. With everything you have to manage on your own since Mom passed, it might make sense to simplify things. Maybe consolidate some of the accounts, make joint ownership easier, just so nothing gets complicated if something were to happen. I looked at him. I let the silence sit there for a moment, not aggressively, just long enough. Then I said, I appreciate that. I've actually just been working with an attorney to get everything organized. It's all taken care of. He nodded. He smiled. But something behind his eyes shifted, the way a door shifts when the lock doesn't catch. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a woman who introduced herself as a private investigator. She had been hired by Mr. Holt's office at my request to document the access history on the security system and obtain a formal record of what had been transmitted and when. She was calling to tell me the documentation was complete. The picture it created was not ambiguous. Over the course of 3 months, Patrick had accessed the live camera feed on 47 separate occasions during hours I was known to be home. 17 of those sessions had lasted longer than 20 minutes. The angle of the hallway camera, combined with the resolution of the device, would have given a clear view of any document laid flat on my desk. The daily summary emails included motion timestamps accurate to within 30 seconds, along with thumbnail images triggered by the motion detection. He had known my routine completely. He would have known when I was meeting with my financial advisor. I'd taken calls at my desk in view of the camera. He would have known the names of my accounts. He would have known if he'd watched carefully enough the approximate figures on the statements I reviewed. Mr. Holt presented the documentation to Patrick's attorney on a Thursday morning. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I was at home, in the kitchen, drinking coffee that I'd made myself, at a table where nobody was watching me anymore, because the cameras had been professionally removed 2 days prior. Willa called me that Thursday afternoon. She was crying when I picked up. Not the kind of crying that's performed, The kind that comes from somewhere real, that a person can't completely organize before it comes out. She said she hadn't known. She said she'd thought the system was a gift, a real one, that Patrick had said it was for my safety. I don't know what the whole truth is between those two people. I may never know. But I told her I believed her. Because I did, at least partly. And because even when the truth is complicated, saying you believe someone is the only door left open. Patrick removed his administrator access voluntarily as part of an agreement Mr. Holt negotiated. There was no criminal charge. The attorney explained that the legal threshold for surveillance in a home the person had access to, in a state where consent law is structured the way it is in North Carolina, made prosecution uncertain. What happened instead was documentation and an agreement, and Patrick knowing that I knew and that the people who needed to know also knew. That changed things. Not everything. But the shape of things changed. Willa still calls. The calls are different now, shorter sometimes, and there's something careful in them that didn't used to be there. Like we're both being polite about a scar neither of us wants to press on. I don't know if that goes away over time, or whether it just becomes the texture of what we are. June would have known what to do with it. I'm still figuring it out. What I know is this. I am a careful man. I have been careful my whole life, and someone still found the one moment I relaxed. The moment a man relaxes when his daughter is standing in his kitchen crying because she missed her mother, and her husband is in the next room setting up a device that he said was for your safety, and the evening smells like pot roast, and you want to believe the people who say they love you mean exactly that and nothing else. That's the moment they looked for. The moment the careful man looked like everyone else. If someone who loves you is offering to install something in your home, you're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to look at the settings yourself before you say thank you. You are allowed to call a friend who knows more than you do and ask him to take a look, not because you're suspicious, but because love that's real doesn't flinch at transparency. The people who care about you want you to have the answers. They don't create second accounts. They don't build a profile of your life in a folder you didn't know existed. They don't need to know what time you wake up in the morning to prove that they're worried about you. I still drink my coffee at the kitchen table. Same table, same chair, same window. But now when I sit there, the room is just a room, and I am just a man in it. And that is exactly enough. I've had a long time to sit with what happened, and the thing I keep coming back to isn't Patrick, and it isn't the cameras, and it isn't even the night Lonnie showed me what was on that screen. What I keep coming back to is the moment I chose not to pick up the phone and call Willa right away. That single moment of stillness, of choosing to understand before I reacted. That was the thing that changed how everything ended. Because here's what I know about consequences, and I know it the way a man knows something he's earned, rather than something he was told. What a person does in secret will eventually produce something visible. Patrick spent 3 months building a picture of my life, my routines, my finances, the shape of my days, and he thought that information was going to give him something. What it actually gave him was a documented record of his own actions. The same patience he used to watch me, I used to prepare, and preparation, in the end, carries more weight than surveillance. That's not luck, that's the nature of things. When you build something on deception, the structure is always weaker than it appears, because it can only hold as long as the other person doesn't look closely. Lonnie looked closely, and once he did, everything Patrick had constructed started coming apart from the inside. I think about what it took to get through those weeks between finding out and the morning Mr. Holt sat across from Patrick's attorney. I had to be honest with myself about what I was dealing with, not what I wished I was dealing with. Not the version where it was all a misunderstanding, but the actual thing. That kind of honesty is harder than it sounds. It means setting down the story you love in favor of the story that's true. I loved the story where my daughter's husband was a decent man doing his best. Setting that down cost me something real. But it was the only way to see clearly, and seeing clearly was the only way to protect myself. Then I had to keep moving. I had to sit at that dinner table and pass the rolls and ask about the dog and not let my face say what my mind knew. I had to make appointments and sign documents and change account numbers and do all of it quietly without drama, without the satisfaction of a confrontation that would have felt good for 20 minutes and then left me exposed. That kind of steadiness, the kind that holds when everything in you wants to react. That's not something you're born with. That's something you build over years out of the smaller moments where you chose to hold on instead of let go. Lonnie had it. That's why he told me not to touch anything before he explained what he'd found. He understood that information is only useful if you handle it right. Roberta had it. She gave me a name instead of an opinion, which was exactly what I needed. Mr. Holt had it. The people who helped me through this were people who had learned to think before they moved. What happened to me can happen to anyone. The technology makes it easier than it ever was before. But what also remains true is that character is still the longest-running system in a person's life. It runs in the background every day, quiet, accumulating. Patrick's character accumulated one kind of record. Mine accumulated another. When the two records were finally laid next to each other, there wasn't much ambiguity about which one was going to hold up. I'm not telling this story so you'll be suspicious of the people who love you. I'm telling it so that if the moment ever comes, the quiet moment where something doesn't feel right, where a door is open that should be closed, you'll trust that feeling enough to look. And then, once you know what you're looking at, you'll have the clarity to understand it and the steadiness to handle it right. That's all any of us can do.